of the county. The mob leaders and the Latter-day Saint leaders drop an agreement where the leaders agree that one half of the saints, including the leaders and their families, will be out by the 1st of January, 1834. And then the rest of the saints will be out by the 1st of April, 1834. In signing this agreement, the saints had no intention of following through with this, nor were they really obligated to. When you've got a gun in your ribs, anything you sign really isn't legally or morally binding. And so what they're doing is buying time. The mob catches wind of this at the end of October, 1833. They learn that the saints have no intention of abiding by this agreement. And so 31st of October, Halloween night, they could not have picked a better night, the mob starts systematically driving the saints from their homes.
Tragically, the Latter-day Saints were overpowered, eventually were forced to give up their arms, and because of this they were literally defenseless and had no other choice but to concede to the demands of the Jackson County citizens, who demanded an immediate removal from the county.
Joseph was in Kirtland while all of this was happening in Missouri. He is very grieved about the whole thing. This is very upsetting for Joseph. At the same time, he saw it coming. He had been aware of problems developing in Missouri among the saints themselves. He was aware that people had been going up without being called. He was aware that many were not living the law of consecration as they had been told to do in Missouri.
I am not at all astonished at what has happened to you, neither to what has happened to Zion. And I could tell you all the whys and wherefores of all these calamities. But alas, it is vain to warn and give precepts, for all men are naturally disposed to walk in their own paths.
I think in the final analysis in Joseph's mind, Jackson County wasn't something that the Missourians took away. It was something that the Latter-day Saints had lost.
The Lord expressed His mercy in commanding the prophet Joseph Smith to lead a group of brethren to aid the saints who had been removed from Jackson County by the mob, when He commanded the prophet on the 24th of February, 1834, to gather an army of men that Joseph was to lead and to travel from northeastern Ohio, the near 1,000 miles, down to Jackson County, Missouri. This was not a convenient time for Joseph to leave Ohio. There were at least three major things that would have prevented him from going. One was they were in the midst of building the Kirtland Temple, also fulfilling a command of the Lord, which Joseph was very much involved in. Second, partly due to the destruction of the properties, in particular the businesses, the printing press in Jackson County, Missouri, Joseph was in debt. They had lost the property that was income producing there, and he had obtained loans from creditors in New York City, and they were calling those loans due. And if Joseph then were to leave and go to Ohio, or leave Ohio and go to Missouri, they might think he's trying to escape his debts. And so he felt he had to get that paid first. Third, there was an apostate, Philastus Hurlbert, who had initiated vexatious lawsuits against the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram, and they had to remain in Ohio to attend the court sessions. But Joseph knew that if he didn't go on the journey of Zion's camp, he probably wouldn't be very successful in recruiting others to attend with him. Now, all three of those problems were resolved.
The revelation we now know as Section 103 of the Doctrine and Covenants was given in early 1834 and commanded that in order to redeem Zion, the people gather together a minimum of 100 people and as many as 500 people to go down into Missouri and assist the saints there as they reclaimed their lands. In order to get that number of people, Joseph and others went on circuits in the surrounding areas in order to recruit those people. Joseph himself went into Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, traveled hundreds of miles, and by the early part of May 1834, they had reached the minimum number, and Joseph was able to begin to organize his contingent and prepare them for the march.
On Sunday, May 4th, The prophet Joseph preached to the saints in Kirtland under the shade of the new schoolhouse, which was partially enclosed, many of those who were to form the camp of Zion being present. He bore testimony of the truth of the work which God had revealed through him, and promised the brethren that if they should live as they should before the Lord, keeping his commandments, and not like the children of Israel murmur against the Lord and his servants, they should all safely return, and not one of them should fall upon the mission they were about to undertake. For if they were united and exercised faith, God would deliver them out of the hands of their enemies.
This set the tone for the entire camp and set it apart from any others that might be traveling that same route. Really, the path was not going to be the dusty or the muddy trail that led from Ohio down to Missouri. It was going to be the path of righteousness.
Over a period of roughly 3 months, Joseph Smith and members of Zion's camp traveled down to Missouri and back in a round trip of nearly 2,000 miles. And it was not a pleasure journey. It was an opportunity for these men to sacrifice their time and possibly even their lives as they proceeded down to aid their fellow saints in Missouri. As they traveled, they encountered all kinds of difficulties. They had difficulty with the heat. They had difficulty finding good water. Those kinds of experiences made Zion's camp not only an opportunity for these people to accept a commandment of the Lord, but also to prove their worthiness in an Abrahamic kind of test. It gave Joseph an opportunity to get to know these men better in intimate circumstances, to find out which of his followers, which of the members of the church who had volunteered for this trip were truly dedicated to the Lord's purposes.
Every night before retiring to rest, at the sound of the trumpet, we bowed before the Lord in the several tents and presented our thank offerings with prayer and supplication. And at the sound of the morning trumpet, every man was again on his knees before the Lord, imploring his blessing for the day.
In the revelation commanding the organization of Zion's camp, the Lord declared that angels would go up before the camp and that even his own presence would be there to guide them.
Notwithstanding our enemies were continually breathing threats of violence, we did not fear. Neither did we hesitate to prosecute our journey, for God was with us, and his angels went before us, and the faith of our little band was unwavering. We know that angels were our companions, for we saw them.
Perhaps the greatest challenge that the prophet Joseph Smith faced on the journey was the murmuring and perhaps also just complaining of some of the members. Joseph was meek and humble in trying to handle that difficulty. There was one occasion, however, just before they crossed the Mississippi River, where during a noonday stop he climbed up on a wagon wheel and told the members of the camp that because of their unruliness and their murmurings, that there was going to be a scourge that struck that camp. 3 weeks later, on June the 24th, the dreaded disease of cholera broke out in the camp. 2 days previous to that outbreak, Joseph had received a revelation now recorded in Doctrine and Covenants section 105, in which the Lord called for the disbandment of Zion's camp. Joseph humbly accepted the Lord's command and informed the members of the camp that because of their transgressions, the Lord had indicated the time to redeem Zion had not arrived, and would not until they had learned to be more obedient.
Because the Zion's camp group was not immediately successful in redeeming Zion, there were those critical in the group and among the saints in Kirtland who claimed that the Zion's camp march had been a failure. But God's ways are not man's ways. And in fact, the Zion's camp journey performed an extremely important purpose in laying a foundation for those who would lead the church over the next several decades.
In February of 1835, a few months following the march of Zion's camp, the prophet Joseph called on Brigham Young to organize a meeting here in the Kirtland schoolhouse. Men invited to attend were those who had marched with the prophet in Zion's camp.
From these men, the Lord would select those who were going to be members of the original quorum of the 12 apostles, and also later those who were going to be members of the Quorum of the 70.
From this